Okay. So welcome to another MicroGiants exciting meeting of MicroGiants, and thank you all for coming today. We just finished up last time talking about marketing planning, what is marketing, and the definition of marketing. But before we get into serious planning issues on marketing, how do you actually do the planning part? It's interesting, I think, to take a segue a little bit, a little cul-de-sac, and talk about businesses as a whole and why did they fail. Remember, we talked about marketing as being, as defined by Drucker, the purpose of a business is to find a customer. And then that and innovation are the two things you do. And he says everything else you do in business is just a cost. Meaning those are not things you try to really work on. You try and get a customer and you innovate in order to be able to solve customer problems. So with that in mind, then when you say, well, gee, it'd be kind of interesting to say, why do businesses fail? So I thought we'd talk just a little bit about that. So I've got 6 points here that are not, it's not an exhaustive list, but these are the primary ones. And these are based mostly on my experience in watching clients who are not doing very well, those that maybe I couldn't save, and then others who I have conversations with who perhaps I didn't really work with, but got to know them well enough. So this really represents hundreds and hundreds of businesses over the last 35, 40 years. And the number one problem, and this is not what you'll see when you see a survey, the number one problem is they never find a customer. So we've got Drucker saying your purpose is to find a customer, do business with somebody who's a customer. And the reason businesses fail, and number one reason, is they don't find one. And that really isn't exactly that, they couldn't find one, it's that they couldn't sell one. They couldn't find a product that the customer would buy. They could not develop a product that was priced properly for the marketplace, or they didn't innovate a basic solution so that it looked different and was differentiated from their competition. And so number one is they can't find a customer. Number two, they don't solve the problem that the customer has. Or they don't make it a desirable product so that they might want to buy it. Three is that, and these tie in with each other, that there's a lack of innovation and they don't really improve. And so I'm saying they lack innovation and improvement gene. And the reason that I call it a gene is because there are folks who can't help themselves to look at, solve problems, and innovate. That's the way they work. That's how their brain works. Anytime they look at something, they're considering how would they make it better, or how do they solve another problem? And then there are a group of people who don't have that, what I'm calling a gene, but they don't really have the natural aptitude to want to solve that problem. That doesn't mean that you have to have that, but it does mean you have to know that you are going to have to innovate in your business over time in order to stay successful over time. Many times they lack the business science, or they lack the art, and that's I call the managing is an art and a science. And the science part has to do with all of the numbers and the analytics and the data and that sort of thing. And the art has to do with innovation and products and design and that sort of thing. Many times small businesses don't have in one person both of those attributes. And so they end up being sort of right brain or left brain. Now that doesn't mean you can't be successful at all. In fact, if you find a customer and you solve their problem, many times you can get by without any science at all, or any art. You just do business because you have positioned yourself so well. The product is positioned in a market niche. It just sells. And so if you can do that, you can get by without number four. Number five is they don't plan to succeed. In other words, they really don't plan anything at all. And again, that's not really where success always comes from, is by not planning. because if you can do the first three, you're going to possibly succeed. You just won't be maybe as profitable or grow as much. And then number 6, don't stick to a correct plan of action. And that has to do with number 5, and that is that they don't plan. And if they did plan, they wouldn't have the discipline to stick with it anyway. As businesses grow, more of these pieces come into play. You can get, if you have 1, 2, and 3, you can be in business and get rolling, and you grow, and you look like you've been pretty successful and you're making money. But when you get to a certain point, 4, 5, and 6 need to be implemented in order to stay in business most of the time, not always. And sometimes it takes a fairly large business in order to require those to be successful. But that's why, as we go through the numbers, you'll see that a lot of people make it, not a lot, a small number of people make it to 5 years, and the ones that go out of business after 5 years, it's because they haven't hit 4, 5, and 6. So the real reason why they go out of business, it's not so much why do you fail, but why do you actually go out of business? And now this is where the surveys will come up, and they'll basically say, well, we ran out of cash, and or the management was poor, which has to do with 4, 5, and 6 up above, or they're just emotionally drained, or they lack the management of skills and the aptitude to run a successful business. So having looked at those, let's look at some stats. 3 out of 5 businesses, when you start out, 3 out of 5 businesses fail the first year, 4 out of 5 in 5 years. And so that's 80% are gone in 5 years. And so it's a little bit like throwing some mud on the wall. You know, some mud sticks and some mud doesn't. And this little graphic, there we go. And you know, and it's a random thing. You could literally throw mud on the wall, and why does some stick and why does some not? Well, if it hits if a little glob of mud hits a crack or a seam in a brick, it might have an opportunity to stick. Well, that particular business is successful, but the others are not. So in other words, you can just throw mud on the wall, and you're still going to have some that are successful, but most of them don't make it that way. You need to have a lot more planning. The question then is, who are the ones that succeed, those that fit into a crack? And of course, this really follows with the theme of my book, and that is finding a crack and filling that crack and staying there. So one of the things that I like to do is briefly is to talk about who are the successful ones. There's a difference between the survivor group. So you've got 80%, and of the 20% that are left, you've got 3/4 of those perhaps who are surviving and making a living. And you have a very small percentage of those that actually prosper and become the millionaire. The Millionaire Next Door was a book that was written several years ago, and they did a big study on where did the money come from. And the largest group were small business people, and the second largest group were professionals who set up a business, like a doctor or an architect. So they're really in business, but they have a professional, say, education or skill level. A small number, very, very small, are corporate managers who have very, very high salaries. And then there's a really teeny weeny small slice that are the super rich, like athletes and actors. So most of those millionaires are really coming from small business. The ones that do well have a few characteristics that are really interesting. And I think it's terribly interesting, because I've run into several of these. I've been very fortunate to help some of them, make some pretty good money. And I found these things to be true in each one of them. They have integrity. They are honest people, and they're honest with all of their customers and their employees and their people. Number 2, they have a lot of discipline and self-control. They just see things through to the end. Number three, they have social skills. They get along well with people. They have almost all the time a very supportive spouse who is there to help them in any way, either in the business or at home, or raising the family, but they're completely supportive. They really work hard. They're not working 50 hours a week. They're working 60 hours, 70 hours, 80 hours. They just absolutely stay to the task. They get it done. But they also try and reserve time for their families and in other community events. And then they absolutely do not gamble. Now that's really an interesting thing, and the reason is that small business people are gamblers already. Just being in business is a gamble. But for some reason, those who really make it big really never do, gambling on sports teams or Las Vegas. They see that as an absolute waste of time, and they see that the odds are not in their favor, and they don't do it. Here's the profile. The average is 57 years old. They've got kids. They are self-employed. 2/3 of them are completely self-employed. A fifth of them actually are retired. In other words, they've been through business, sold their business, or closed their business. 3/4 of them consider themselves entrepreneurs. You might say they all are. Most of the others that are not in that particular group are self-employed professionals, as we mentioned, doctors, lawyers, accountants. They have a medium income that is so really old of $131,000. This is probably easily $250,000 today. 13% of millionaires make more than $500,000, and that's probably 13% or more in the 800,000 to $1 million. But now remember, when you say this, you're really talking about company profits here. You're talking about, because they have subchapter S businesses and it flows through to them, or even if they have a corporation where they're paying double if they take out dividends. But so this is a little bit interpolated, but this includes their business. That's not their personal income. It's not what they live on. 80% are first generation affluent. So for those people who say that everybody who's rich it was given to them by their family, that is not true. 20% of them perhaps, and actually less than that. It's less than that because you still have a very small percentage of actors and executives, and so maybe 15% get some money from their parents. So it's a small percentage. People have the ability to make it in one generation. They live well below their means, and this is important. There are very few mansions or European luxury cars. And so that's because they really value cash, and they're careful about what they turn their cash in, what assets they turn their cash into. So here are the general proportions. Only a small percentage of the population are worth $1 million, and of those, about 25% are in fact business owners. Just a few other characteristics. They see the most trusted the accountant is their most trusted their most trusted financial advisor is their accountant. And strangely, accountants don't want that role. They don't want to be the most trusted advisor. They are self-described tightwads. They buy and hold real estate and stocks for the long run. They are very planning and goal-oriented, which ties into the whole idea of marketing and where we're going to go in terms of how to do the planning for marketing. They try to not pay any more taxes than they have to. But only 17% attended private high schools, and 55% of them, though, did send their children to private schools, which is a little bit unusual. They want the best for their kids. They are well educated, but they're not great students. about a 2.9 GPA. And today, very few of them could get into an average or into a major university because their SATs was a very sort of medium 1190. And that's not enough to get you into a major university many times today. Work style, they work really hard. And actually, when they get started, it is more like these 60 to 80 hours that I mentioned. They integrate all their things into their business. And then how did they become so wealthy in one generation? They really found that there was an opportunity that others ignored. Now, this is really marketing here. This is what we're intending to talk about, is how do you position your business so that you can make some money? And the biggest answer is you find an opportunity, a crack in the market, if you will, that others have not penetrated. I'm going to pass that particular joke. The key to building wealth, really from three different authorities, market positioning is finding an underserved market where others don't. We've mentioned that. Execution of the marketing plan. And Napoleon Hill, who is an author of great renown, some of you may have read him. Most of the motivational work today is built on Napoleon Hill's shoulders. And basically, he studied the really, really wealthy in the early 1900s, had an opportunity to go talk and get to know all of the super wealthy people of that era. And he said the majority of men meet failure because of their lack of persistence in creating new plans to take the place of those which fail. In other words, you make a course correction if you've made a mistake. And so that ties into the planning we're going to talk about as well. So what drives business growth? And these are nearly identical, and we're going to just brush through these because this really has a lot to do with marketing, but it's market positioning, execution of the plan, and then course correction. And again, this reiterates where we've been. You occupy a crack in the market with very little competition. You'd be financially conservative, and boy, is that important today with things that are going on that's so crazy and financial institutions the way they are. And then you need to be able to attract and motivate the right people. There's a little spiff on my book. We'll pass that. And with that, we're just going to stop and see if you have any comments or questions about the people who have these characteristics, which again were the really successful folks, the ones who became millionaires because of small business. Any comments, questions, discussion on that?
Sure, I'll start off with one. I think the ability to deal with failure is probably one of the key or the quintessential attributes, because every business plan, I believe, will face a point where it's failed at some point, or you believe it's failed. Sometimes it hasn't, but nonetheless, you're pretty sure in your mind that it has, and you got to go back to the drawing book. You missed the boat on this one. And so I would say that the key attribute is to be able to take a step back, recalibrate, and say, to heck with it, I'm going to go and give it another shot. And maybe I'll do it this way a little differently, but I'm not giving up. So I would say Winston Churchill comes up here in my mind when he said, never give up.
Never. Right.
And he repeats it 3 times in a row, and then he walks off.
Yeah.
And I would actually say that probably is, if there was one thing that we have to be able to embrace, that is the one thing. You got to get back.
I would put it, I wouldn't disagree, John, but I would say that that has to follow a little bit of a realistic examination of what it is that you did so that you can make the course adjustment.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and be diligent about that. I've run into a few folks who thought they were doing everything right. They weren't, and their numbers were indicating that they weren't doing it right. Yet for whatever reason, they were just so stuck on the idea that you had to keep doing it. And so they just got further in the hole. So, I mean, you have to recognize when you're digging a hole versus attempting to get out of the hole, and, and be diligent about it. And I think, and that brings up a really good point when talking about successful entrepreneurs. Many successful entrepreneurs meet that first 4 years and the criteria. They find a customer, they innovate, they've gotten that far, they've found a crack in the market. But then, because they are innovative and creative and they're not diligent in the sense that they're focused on the details of the business, they end up with problems, and if they're unable to solve those problems through outside help or kind of hunkering down enough, many times they can't make that happen. And so the personalities, and you've done a lot of personality work, but the personality of the really creative isn't often as compatible with the personality of the bookkeeper, the analyst, the one who digs into the data in order to find the answer. Yeah. Any other comments from?
Well, can you guys hear me pretty well?
No. I hear you here.
You sound, yeah, I think I only heard you from Ron's.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the I kind of relate to that a lot, Ron, when it comes down to doing it, but sometimes I feel like I'm the one that it's opposite things that's doing everything wrong, but it's still moving forward. So I don't know when am I supposed to put attention to detail, when should I'm not, and things like that. So I think it's been very interesting, but I'm still here. I'm still survived 2.5 years. I mean, 2 years later. But I think it failed like 8 times to be able to find a success and move forward. So when John was talking about failures, like, yeah, I failed about 20 times already. Or I learned about 20 times already, I think.
Yeah. Well, you can take solace in knowing that many of these people we're talking about have had 2 businesses before the one that they made successful worked. So that is a fairly common occurrence, that people try a couple things out first before they actually are successful. And so the question is, well, did the first 2 fail because the idea was good and you got customers, but you couldn't maintain the growth, or did it fail because you didn't ever get any customers? And so, I mean, that's part of the analysis, as to why did one work and the other one didn't. But I do think that in my own experience, I was very fortunate, I think, to be naturally creative, but for whatever reason, my mentor made me do detail work that I didn't really like. In those days, everything was done manually in big journals and records and giant books, and you'd go through handwritten tickets and you'd write down what you sold and how much it was. And then you would use, if you were lucky, you used an adding machine. And if you were really good with math, you used your head, and you went through literally and added everything up manually. So, I mean, I wasn't naturally taken to do that. I think what gave me an appreciation was being forced to do that, and wanting to satisfy my boss and do my job. But what I learned from him or them, there were 2, a father and son, is that they were better able to run the business because they had information. And once I learned to love the data and the trends and what it told me, I became a much more detailed person than I think I was prior to that. So somewhere early in my career, I think learned how to turn the right brain off and the left brain on, and vice versa, because I knew that there had to be 2 roles. You have to be in an analytical mode and a detail mode for certain functions, and then you have to be creative and more, I'll say spontaneous, but I don't really mean spontaneous, but you've got to be more creative in another role, and those need to be channeled. And I think that really good entrepreneurs are able to channel that in an incredibly beneficial way. Elon Musk comes to mind. This guy is an engineer, a scientist. I mean, he's obviously extremely brilliant, not on just one subject, but on a whole lot of technical subjects. And while he tends to look from the outside, it looks like he's skipping around starting these companies and so forth. Yet with his engineers, he can have conversations about the use of nickel in batteries, or what kind of metal or machine you use for the boring machine that will go through the right rock. I mean, he can have those technical conversations, and he has a command of the details. So he's able to do both of those things, but that's extraordinary. There are not very many people.
Hello, Ron. I can't hear you. Christian, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I don't hear Ron anymore. I think the audio went off on them.
Figured out what I do.
Okay.
There it is.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
It's not going to be as good as audio, but
Maybe not as good audio, right? So I don't know where I cut off, but we're talking about Elon Musk and how he's able to really handle both of those elements. And I think it's important to say you don't have to turn into an Elon Musk in order to be successful in business by any stretch of the imagination. Basically, what you have to do is you have to be able to find people that can match your shortcomings. That really is, I think, the skill of the entrepreneur, is to find people that can do the things that need to be done, and not be afraid to go outside and look for experts to come in and give you advice on how to go. For the most part, good entrepreneurs tend to do that. Good ones. There are a lot of them that survive and do just fine, but they haven't optimized their business or their growth. But to be able to optimize your business and really grow as fast as you can is something that, you always have to bounce ideas off of other experts. That's just a good idea. So I think we're complete with that subject. For some of you, this is maybe the second time you've seen it, but I thought it would be important, just as kind of a supplement to where we're going to go, is we put these in a series for a series of videos that will be on our channel. So we will stop for now, and then we can continue this on.